Hello, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here today and to speak to you. It's a real privilege to come back to Australia. I was at the conference 3 years ago, and I can already tell you this one is bigger and better. So it's great. I think we're off to a good start. So I talk quite a lot about the nature of the problem in the water supply and sanitation sector. And one of the things that I have at my disposal is the Joint Monitoring Program data, which UNICEF and WHO run the JMP, and we have a wealth of data on water supply and sanitation. And usually for a crowd like this, I start up with a slide like this, and I'm talking about all those people who don't have coverage. And I start out with a depressing statistic like this, that even though we're on track for the MDG for water supply, and globally water supply coverage is 87%, that there are still 884 million people using unimproved water supply. But that's not what I'm here to talk about today. I'm actually here today to talk about the people who already have water supply and sanitation, which is a bit unusual for me. So what I've done is I've done a little bit of an interrogation of the data with the help of our statistics people in UNICEF, and I thought I'd show you some of what I had found. So what I thought I'd do is I'd start with this graphic. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this. This is the way we present a lot of the data that we have now in the form of a ladder. And in order to understand these bars, each one is a region, an MDG region. And in order to understand the water supply coverage, what you have to do is add the two blue bits together. And what are the differences between the two blue bits? The dark blue is piped water on premises, and the lighter blue is what we call other improved. And you're going to hear a lot about that category called other improved. And what's in the other improved is tube wells with hand pumps and protected springs and rainwater catchment, all those kinds of things. What I thought I'd do is I'd start out by looking at some of the differences between the regions in terms of water supply. And what really pops out at you here is Eastern Asia. You can see East Asia, that's completely dominated by China, which is by far the most populous country in the region. And what you can see there is that they have made rapid progress in terms of water supply coverage, and it's all been in that dark blue. It's all been on piped on the premises. This is between 1990 and 2008. But let's contrast that against Southern Asia. Okay, Southern Asia completely dominated by India. Very, very different picture. They've made almost the same amount of progress in terms of coverage, but using a very different approach, using other improved. Then Southeastern Asia also has a similar sort of pattern, lots and lots of other improved. And then finally here we have Sub-Saharan Africa, very little piped water on premises, but also not that much other improved. So already we can see that the sustainability context for water supply is very different region from region. Now, I'm going to go a bit more into detail on some of these data, but before I did, I think I've discovered, after several years of presenting JMP data, that it never hurts to check that everybody understands where the JMP data come from. And it's always controversial, and I guarantee that at least 3 of you will come up to me after my speech in the tea break and tell me that all these data are wrong. So please decide who you're going to be now, and I'm looking forward to talking to you. So the JMP uses household survey data. Okay, so it's based on several types of household survey, particularly the multi-indicator cluster survey done by UNICEF, and the demographic and health survey, which is done by USAID, but also censuses and any kind of nationally representative, robust household survey. And these household surveys that ask questions on a multitude of things about whether people have a bicycle and whether they use a bed net, also ask questions on what kind of water and sanitation facilities people use. And then we use these categories as proxies for whether water is improved or unimproved. Okay? There's all sorts of flaws in this, in the sense that it is using people's responses on what kind of water supply they use as a proxy for whether it's safe water or not. And we can talk later about all the things that, all the kinds of compromises we have to make in terms of these data. And then what the JMP does is we plot the responses from the surveys. And every few years, as we add new surveys, we replot this using a linear regression line, and then we draw the line out to make the estimate in each year in which we need to make the estimate. So the slope of the line changes quite a bit. So this is, in a way, a sort of survey of surveys. So now that you understand the basics of how the JMP works, what I thought I'd do is show you what happens when you pester statisticians. They actually give you all kinds of interesting looks into the data. So what I did is first I asked them to look at just developing countries and to take the trends and disaggregate them a bit and also divide them out by urban and rural. And so what we see here is, again, the dark blue bit here is piped on the premises, and then we've separated out public taps. Okay, so in the other improved, we have public taps, but I've had them separate that out as a different category. And the reason is that public taps are usually connected to a networked pipe system. And so they really, in many ways, have a lot in common with the piped on premises in the way the sustainability of those systems is managed. And then we also have the other improved, but minus the public taps. And here we also see a little disaggregation of the unimproved. The orange at the top is the number of people still using surface water. And that's quite interesting to see that in rural areas we still have a significant amount of the population using surface water. So what do we see here? We see in rural areas that we've still got 34% of the population using unnetworked other improved. So this is mostly wells, hand pumps, springs, that type of thing. And in urban also, 11% of the population in urban areas also still using these non-network systems. And then I asked to look at three of the key regions, three of the regions that I highlighted in the previous graph. And I asked for a different cut of the data, and here I asked for boreholes specifically to be disaggregated, which is possible for us to do. And most of these boreholes will be boreholes with hand pumps on them, and that's the yellow part there. And I found this quite surprising, because in southern Asia, still 49% of the population is relying on boreholes. And these aren't boreholes connected to pipe systems, because if they were, they would appear in the blue. So this is boreholes that are point sources. So what we see is that not only have we got half the population of South Asia using those kinds of sources, but also it's growing. Since 1990, it's gone from 39% to 49%, and that's in the context, of course, of huge population growth in the same period. So this is a significant number of people. And then I looked at the Wealthquintile analysis, and this is the Wealthquintile analysis from India. We've started to do more and more of this disaggregation by wealth quintiles. So the bar at the far left there that you're looking at, this is the poorest 20% of households, and the bar at the right is the richest 20% of households. And of course, I don't think this will surprise you, but guess who's using all of those boreholes? Not surprisingly, the rich are using piped water, and the poor are overwhelmingly using those point sources. 66% of the poorest in India are using point sources. Now, I thought at this point you might be a bit tired of all those numbers, so I thought I'd show you a photograph just as a bit of relief, just in case you had forgotten what a hand pump in India looked like. But getting back to the data, that's all the break you get. Then I asked the statisticians to tell me a bit about what had happened recently of the people who had gained access in the last 18 years. You know, what's happened? I mean, we're looking at some historic data there, but now if we look at actually what's happened in the last 18 years, and in actual fact, what we find is most people who gained access in the last 18 years did so because of piped water on premises being rolled out to them. Particularly in urban areas, you can see there 78% of the 950 million people who got access in the last 18 years did by piped water, and 50% of the 728 million rural dwellers. But the interesting thing there is, again, 37% of that fairly recent coverage has been through other improved sources, which, as we've seen, is mostly things like hand pumps. So that's 270 million people. So obviously this is something that we still continue to do. It's not something that we did in the past. We still continue to roll out new coverage this way. And then as an aside, I thought I would remind you all that many of these sources have a huge time collection burden associated with them. This is a map of sub-Saharan Africa, which shows the countries in which more than 25% of the population spends more than 30 minutes on one single round trip. We don't even know how many of those round trips those people are making. And of course, who's doing all that walking? We know who it is, and the JMP data, in fact, bear that out. It's women and girls who are doing all that walking. So there's more than just sustainability, which is a problem associated with all these point sources. So then I thought I'd be very brave, and I'd try to look at this data and see if it tells us something about the kind of categories of sustainability things we should be anxious about. So what the data tells me is that there's 4 categories. I'll put this out to you, and then you can all disagree with me later. Urban piped on premises, and the standposts and public taps associated with those urban pipe systems, usually coming under some kind of municipal or utility management, some sort of collective management. Then there's urban point sources, which are urban boreholes and springs. We saw that that's still a fairly significant category. Then rural piped on premises and standposts under some sort of municipal or utility management. This would be mostly rural small towns. And then rural point sources. These are boreholes, springs, hand pumps, usually maintained by households themselves or small communities. And then I asked the statisticians if they would break down the numbers for me so that I could look at both the proportion and also the absolute numbers. And by this time, the statisticians were getting a bit annoyed at me, but this is what they gave me. So here in urban areas, here are our 2 networked components. So the dark blue is piped on premises, and the light blue is standposts. And that comes out to about 2 billion people. And then here is our other improved, probably largely hand pumps, and that's about 0.3 billion people. And then this is our unserved. That's the other improved in the surface water. And then here in rural, here's our 2 networked bits, and that comes out to about 1.3 billion people. And then here's our large component of point sources, and that's about 1 billion people, and there's the unserved. So now I had a bit of an idea about how many people we were talking about, and I was quite surprised that we still have 1 billion people, 1 billion rural people who are relying on point sources, many of whom are poor and many of whom live in remote communities. And now, of course, I've got to show you the slide that is absolutely essential for any presentation on sustainability. Many of you have seen this before. I think it was presented at the last conference. The organizers, when you sign the contract saying you're coming here, you have to promise that you're going to show this slide, because everybody always does. And of course, it's a story that we all know too well, that hand pumps are very frequently out of order. We have huge problems keeping hand points in order. And here's your light relief with a picture. Clearly, this hand pump has long since stopped functioning, and is now for decorative purposes only. I thought here, as another little aside, I'd also show a slide that tells us a little bit about why we're seeing so many problems with these rural point sources. And part of the problem is that the money in the sector, and this comes back to the issue of aid targeting. This data comes out of the GLASS report, the Global Annual Analysis of Sanitation, Water and Sanitation, which shows that basic systems get very little of water sector aid. And this is in a context of huge growth in the amount of aid coming into the water supply and sanitation sector. But as you can see, the brown is at the bottom. That's basic systems like hand pump systems. And it has completely plateaued out and is now only about 16% of overall aid, while aid to large systems, which are mostly urban systems, has grown and grown. That's that light brown on the slide. Anyway, so now I'm going to be quite brave and tell you what I think all these data tell us about water supply sustainability. It tells us that much of the growth in coverage is being brought about by increases in pipe systems. I actually think this is good news for sustainability, because I think that we've got a lot of knowledge now on how you improve utility management, whether it's public or private or whatever it is. And it's actually easier to ensure sustainability when you're dealing with a utility, because you strengthen that utility and then that has impacts on all the people using water from that utility. But we have continuing significant growth in the numbers of people using point sources, particularly